The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, a monument to 12,000 years of cooperation between species who had learned to share the stars. Or so they told themselves, when they gathered in this vast space where light refracted through walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Ambassador Chen stood at the human delegation's podium, which was smaller than the others and positioned near the back, where junior members belonged, according to traditions older than her entire species' written history. And she tried not to let the familiar frustration show on her face as the Zanari delegate dismissed her proposal with a wave of his 6-fingered hand. "The humans suggest we modernize our trade protocols," the Zanari said, his voice carrying that particular tone of amusement the elder races always used when humanity spoke. How charming that they think their 3 centuries of space travel qualifies them to improve systems that have functioned for millennia. Laughter rippled through the chamber, a sound Chen had grown to hate over her 5 years as Earth's representative, and she sat down, knowing her proposal would be voted down like all the others, not because it lacked merit, but because humans lacked respect. The meeting continued for another 6 hours, during which the council addressed matters of galactic importance with the speed of continental drift, and Chen found her mind wandering to the reports she had read that morning about human crews working in the dead space zones, where reality itself became unreliable. Nobody else wanted those jobs. The maintenance of hyperspace relays in regions where ships vanished if their calculations were off by even a fraction. Yet human engineers volunteered in droves, driven by that reckless optimism the elder races found so amusing and so useful. Captain Rodriguez floated in her maintenance pod 700 light-years from Earth, her hands steady as she rewired a relay junction that had been failing for 3 standard months, and she knew that if she made a mistake here, the resulting cascade could cut off 17 colony worlds from the galactic network. "How's it looking?" her co-pilot asked through the comm, his voice crackling with the interference that made this region so dangerous. "Almost done," Rodriguez said, bypassing a burned-out coupling that should have been replaced a year ago if anyone else had been willing to come out here. "Another hour, and this sector should be stable." She did not mention that her radiation exposure was already approaching dangerous levels, or that the company running these contracts paid human crews 1/3 of what they offered other species, because Rodriguez and her crew were not here for the money. They were here because somebody had to do it, and humans seemed to be the only ones who would. On the colony world of New Chances, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo studied the genetic structure of a Thun patient whose immune system was rejecting a necessary implant, and she cross-referenced it with 17 other species' medical databases, because that was what human doctors did. The Thun physicians had given up after 3 days, declaring the case impossible, but Okonkwo had spent the last 2 weeks learning everything she could about Thun biochemistry, and had just identified a potential treatment using a combination of human and Zanari medical techniques that neither species had thought to combine. "This should work," she told the patient's family through a translator, showing them the simulations. "We'll start treatment tomorrow." The Thun family looked at her with something like wonder, though she could never be quite sure what Thun expressions meant, and the eldest said, through the translator, "Human doctor, why do you care so much? Our own physicians said my daughter was not worth the effort." Okonkwo felt anger flash through her, but kept her voice calm as she said, "Every patient is worth the effort. That's what we believe where I come from." Across the galaxy in the disputed territories, human merchant captain James Wong navigated his ship through an asteroid field that marked the boundary between Kresh and Zanari space, a region both empires claimed, and neither wanted to actually patrol. Wong had been running this route for 6 years, bringing supplies to colonies that would starve without his regular deliveries, and he knew every pirate hideout and every unstable gravitational pocket in this entire sector. His crew was entirely human because nobody else would take the risk, and his profit margins were razor thin because he charged the colonies what they could afford rather than what the market would bear, which made him either a fool or a saint, depending on who you asked. "Captain, we've got company," his navigator announced, highlighting 3 ships on an intercept course. "Looks like the Red Claw pirates." Trouble appeared and said, "Let's see if they remember what happened last time," then opened a channel to the approaching ships. The pirates did remember, and they veered off without a fight because human captains had a reputation in the disputed territories. A reputation for being absolutely crazy and too stubborn to know when they were beaten, which made them dangerous opponents even when they were outgunned. Back on Earth, Director Amanda Foster reviewed the latest statistics from the Human Outreach Commission and felt a familiar mixture of pride and bitterness. In the past year alone, human volunteers had prevented 14 system-wide disasters through their maintenance work. Human merchants had established 7 new trade routes that benefited dozens of species. Human doctors had saved over 2 million non-human lives, and human mediators had resolved 43 separate conflicts before they could escalate into violence. Yet at the Galactic Council, humanity remained a joke. The upstart species that had stumbled into space travel through luck and desperation, and every human contribution was dismissed as either reckless chance or primitive determination. Foster had tried explaining to the Council that humans were not lucky or primitive, but simply willing to do what others would not. Yet the elder races seemed incapable of understanding that distinction. She thought about the families of the crew lost last month, when a relay station exploded during maintenance. 3 humans who died, saving a trade route that served mostly Zanari colonies. And she wondered if the Zanari even knew those names or cared. The answer, she suspected, was no, and that knowledge burned in her chest like a coal she could not extinguish. Ambassador Chen returned to Earth for consultations and met with Foster in an office overlooking the sprawling city of New Geneva, where the Human Outreach Commission coordinated all of humanity's galactic activities. "They voted down the safety proposal," Chen said without preamble, "the one that would have required proper maintenance schedules for all relay stations." Foster closed her eyes and asked, "What was their reasoning this time?" "The Zanari delegate said it would be too expensive," Chen replied, her voice flat with exhaustion. "The Thun said it was unnecessary because the current system has worked for millennia, and the Kresh abstained because they do not care." "How many relay stations are currently operating beyond safe parameters?" Foster asked, though she already knew the answer. 47, Chen said, "all of them in regions where only human crews will work." They sat in silence for a moment, watching ships come and go from the spaceport below. Human ships mostly, because this was Earth, and humans still loved coming home. And Foster thought about all the good her species had done, and all the contempt they had received. "How much longer can we keep doing this?" Chen asked quietly. "How much longer can we keep giving everything and getting nothing back, except mockery?" Foster did not have an answer, but she feared they would find out soon enough, because even human patience had limits, and those limits were being tested every single day. In the frontier reaches, 300,000 humans went about their lives on the colony world of New Harmony, unaware that their star had just developed an instability that would kill them all within a month. The distress signal went out on every frequency, a desperate plea for help that would change everything. Though nobody on New Harmony knew it yet, their deaths would finally teach the galaxy what it meant to take humanity for granted. The first indication that something was catastrophically wrong came when New Harmony missed its weekly check-in, which was unusual but not unprecedented, given the colony's location on the far edge of explored space, where communications could be unreliable. The second indication came 3 days later, when every backup system also failed to respond, which transformed concern into alarm, and sent Earth's colonial office into emergency protocol. Ambassador Chen stood before the Galactic Council once more, but this time she was not presenting a proposal for improvement. She was demanding action for 300,000 human souls who had vanished into silence. "We need a full council investigation," Chen said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. New Harmony was a thriving colony, and now we have nothing. No signals, no responses, nothing. The Zanari delegate examined his datapad with casual interest and said, "Ambassador Chen, the frontier reaches are inherently dangerous. This is why we advised against human expansion into that region. You advised against it because you wanted those resources for yourselves," Chen shot back, abandoning diplomatic courtesy. "But you were too afraid to actually go there. So you let us take the risks, and now that something has gone wrong, you will not even help us investigate?" The Thun Collective's representative spoke in its strange harmonic voice. "The Council has limited resources and many pressing concerns. We cannot divert ships for every colonial mishap." Chen felt something crack inside her chest, some fundamental assumption about how civilized species should behave toward one another. And she said very quietly, "Mishap. 300,000 people are missing, and you call it a mishap?" The Kresh delegate, a massive creature whose species had earned its council seat through military might rather than philosophical achievement, remained silent, which Chen found more disturbing than the others' dismissals. The vote was called, and the result was exactly what Chen had feared. The council would not authorize an investigation, citing resource constraints and the inherent risks of frontier colonization. Earth did not wait for council approval. Within a week, humanity had assembled its own investigative fleet, pulling together every ship that could be spared and sending them toward New Harmony at maximum speed. Admiral Marcus Torres commanded the fleet from the bridge of the ESS Determination, a name that felt grimly appropriate as they crossed into the frontier reaches, and he reviewed the preliminary scans with growing horror. "Sir, you need to see this," his science officer said, highlighting the system where New Harmony had been. "The star's output has increased by 40% in the last month." Torres studied the data and felt ice form in his veins as he recognized the signature. Someone deliberately destabilized that star. They found the evidence 3 days later when a scout ship detected mining equipment in the outer system. Massive installations designed for extracting rare elements from stellar bodies, and the identification codes on that equipment belonged to Kresh industrial corporations. The colony itself was gone, scoured from the planet's surface by the increased radiation as the star burned hotter and brighter. And there were no survivors because the destabilization had happened too fast for evacuation. Torres recorded everything, documenting the mining equipment, the star's altered state, and the evidence that this had been done deliberately. He sent a courier ship back to Earth with orders to deliver this data directly to Ambassador Chen. Chen presented the evidence to the council with hands that shook from rage rather than fear, projecting images of the mining equipment and the mathematical models showing that the destabilization was deliberate. Destabilization could not possibly be natural. The Kresh Empire murdered 300,000 human colonists to access rare elements, she said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "This is not frontier risk or colonial mishap. This is genocide for profit." The Kresh delegate rose, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor, and he spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "The Kresh Empire does not answer to baseless accusations from junior species. Our corporations operate within all legal boundaries." "Legal boundaries?" Chen repeated, her voice rising. "You killed an entire colony, and you hide behind legal boundaries?" The Zanari delegate raised his hand for order and said, "Ambassador Chen, these are serious allegations, but the evidence is circumstantial. We cannot take action against a founding member of the council based on speculation." "Circumstantial?" Chen could barely force the word out. "We have their equipment at the crime scene and mathematical proof of deliberate stellar destabilization. What more do you need?" The Thun representative spoke again, its harmonic voice somehow making the words worse. The Kresh Empire is essential to galactic stability. We cannot afford the disruption that formal accusations would cause. Chen looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates, seeing the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of political costs against human lives. And she understood with perfect clarity that justice would not be found here. The vote was even more lopsided than before. The council would not investigate the Kresh or their corporations, and no action would be taken regarding New Harmony. Chen stood at the podium for a long moment after the vote, feeling the weight of 300,000 deaths pressing down on her shoulders. And then she accessed her personal datapad and opened a connection to Earth. "Director Foster," she said quietly, "please prepare the withdrawal protocols." Foster's face appeared on her screen, grief and anger warring in her expression, and she said, "Are you certain?" "They will not even pretend to care," Chen replied. "We came to the stars seeking partners, and we found only predators who smile while they feed on us." The formal announcement came that evening in a statement broadcast across every frequency the galaxy used, delivered by Earth's Secretary General in a voice that carried generations of disappointment. Humanity entered the Galactic Council with hope and goodwill. The Secretary General said, "We offered our labor, our innovation, our blood when necessary, and we asked only for basic dignity and justice in return. What we received was contempt and mockery, and finally, when 300,000 of our people were murdered, we received indifference. Effective immediately, Earth withdraws from the Galactic Council. All human personnel will return home within 6 standard months. All human contracts will be terminated, and all human services will cease. We came seeking civilization and found barbarism, dressed in philosophical language. We will not be complicit in it any longer. We wish you well." The reaction in council chambers was immediate and dismissive. The Zanari delegate called it a childish tantrum. The Thun predicted humanity would return within a year, and the Kresh said nothing at all. On relay stations across the galaxy, human engineers received the recall order and began packing their equipment with grim satisfaction, knowing that their replacements would find out exactly how difficult and dangerous this work truly was. In hospitals on 17 worlds, human doctors finished treating their current patients and then departed, leaving behind medical databases that contained their techniques but not the intuitive understanding of how to apply them. Human merchants closed their trade routes, canceling contracts and selling their warehouses, and dozens of frontier colonies suddenly realized that their supply lines depended entirely on human willingness to travel through dangerous space. Human mediators withdrew from ongoing negotiations, and talks that had been proceeding smoothly for months suddenly collapsed. As species who had relied on human bridge building found themselves unable to communicate effectively. The exodus was methodical and thorough. Humanity had learned organization from the elder races, and now applied those lessons to their departure, leaving nothing behind except empty spaces that would soon be felt. Ambassador Chen was the last to leave, standing in the empty human delegation office one final time. And she thought about all the proposals she had made, and all the good humanity had tried to do. The Zanari delegate found her there, and said, "This is foolish, Ambassador. Earth needs the Council more than the Council needs Earth." Chen looked at him and smiled without humor. "That is what you tell yourselves, but we are about to discover the truth together. Your people will suffer without galactic trade," the Zanari continued, "without access to Council resources and protection." "Perhaps," Chen agreed, "but we will suffer with our dignity intact, and that matters more than you can understand." She left without looking back, boarding the last human ship in Council space. And as they jumped to FTL, she watched the massive Council station shrink in the view screen until it was just another point of light against the infinite dark. On Earth, Director Foster coordinated the returning personnel and began implementing plans that humanity had been developing in secret for years. Plans for self-sufficiency and independent development. The galaxy thought humanity needed them, and perhaps once that had been true. But 3 centuries in space had taught humans how to survive and thrive in environments that would kill any other species. Now, they would discover what they could accomplish when they stopped trying to please masters who would never respect them. The Galactic Council continued its business as usual, confident that the humans would come crawling back when reality set in, and they did not notice the small problems beginning to appear at the edges of their civilization. They would notice soon enough. The first relay station failed 3 months after the last human engineer departed. A critical junction in the Zanari commercial corridor that had been operating on borrowed time for over a year. The Zanari technical teams arrived to find a mess of failing systems that their manuals said should be simple to repair. But the manuals had been written for ideal conditions, and this station had not seen ideal conditions in decades. Why did the humans never report these deficiencies? The lead engineer asked, staring at jury-rigged repairs that held together systems that should have been replaced long ago. His assistant checked the maintenance logs and said, "They did report them, every month for the past 6 years. The requests were denied due to cost considerations." The lead engineer felt something uncomfortable stir in his mind. A question about how the humans had kept this station running when it should have failed years ago. But he pushed the thought aside and focused on the immediate problem. It took them 4 weeks to complete repairs that human crews had been doing in 3 days, and when they finally restored function, the lead engineer filed a report recommending immediate upgrades to 17 other stations in the corridor. The recommendation was denied due to budget constraints, and 6 months later, 3 more stations failed in cascade, cutting off the Zanari core worlds from their richest colonies for nearly 2 standard months. In the disputed territories, Captain Wong's replacement learned about pirate-infested space the hard way, when the Red Claw gang intercepted his convoy and stripped it bare, taking cargo worth millions of credits and leaving the crew alive out of what might have been mercy. The colonies that depended on that supply run faced shortages of medicine and food, and when they contacted the Fun Merchant Consortium about emergency deliveries, they were quoted prices 3 times what Wong had charged. "But this is extortion," the colony administrator protested. "We cannot afford these rates." The Fun Merchant's response came back cold and mathematical. "Then perhaps you should have appreciated Captain Wong's generosity while you had it. The market price is the market price. Half the colonies paid the inflated prices, and half chose to go without, rationing what they had and hoping they could last until cheaper options appeared. And several hundred colonists died that year from preventable causes. The Fun Collective attempted to establish new trade routes through the disputed territories, using their own careful methodologies and risk-averse planning. And they lost 3 ships in the first month to hazards that Wong had navigated routinely for 6 years. After the 3rd loss, the collective withdrew from the region entirely, declaring it economically non-viable, and 17 colonies that had been growing and prosperous under human trade connections found themselves isolated and struggling. On the medical station orbiting Fun Prime, Dr. Okonkwo's replacement studied the case files she had left behind, and found detailed notes on cross-species treatments that seemed almost miraculous in their effectiveness. The notes were clear and comprehensive, explaining exactly what Okonkwo had done for each patient. But when he tried to replicate her results with a new patient suffering from similar issues, everything went wrong. The treatment that had worked perfectly for Okonkwo's patient sent his patient into cascading organ failure, and he barely managed to stabilize them before permanent damage occurred. He reviewed the notes again and again, finding no errors in his application of the technique, and finally understood that the notes captured what Okonkwo had done, but not how she had known to do it. The human doctor had possessed some intuitive understanding of how different species' biologies interacted, some ability to see patterns across biological systems that came from treating dozens of species simultaneously, and that understanding could not be written down or taught. Medical facilities across the galaxy began experiencing similar problems as they tried to maintain the cross-species treatment programs that human doctors had pioneered, and success rates dropped dramatically. On Zanari Prime, a plague emerged that jumped species barriers in ways their epidemiologists had never seen. A mutation that affected Zanari and Toon and 17 other species with equal virulence. The Zanari medical establishment searched their databases desperately for treatment protocols, finding research papers written by human doctors who had studied cross-species diseases. But the papers described symptoms and theoretical treatments without providing the practical knowledge of how to adapt those treatments to individual patients. 3 million Zanari died over the course of a year, along with hundreds of thousands of other species, and the plague only burned itself out when it ran out of vulnerable hosts. Counselor Ven of the Zanari attended memorial services for friends and colleagues lost to the plague, dismissing a human proposal for pandemic preparedness 2 years earlier because it seemed like unnecessary paranoia. The memory tasted like ash in his mouth. In the council chambers, disputes that human mediators had kept carefully balanced began to spiral into open conflict, and the remaining delegates found themselves unable to bridge gaps that had seemed manageable before. The Zanari and Thun fell into a trade war over mineral rights in a border system, both sides convinced of their righteousness, and without humans to find compromise solutions, the dispute escalated until both species deployed military forces. No shots were fired, but the standoff lasted 8 months and cost both sides billions of credits in lost trade. And when it finally resolved through sheer economic exhaustion, both species had lost more than they could possibly have gained. The humans would have found a solution, one Zanari diplomat said privately to a colleague. Talent for seeing what both sides actually needed versus what they claimed to want. His colleague, who had laughed at human mediators many times, said nothing. The hyperspace relay network continued to deteriorate as stations failed faster than they could be repaired, and the careful maintenance schedules that human crews had followed without official authorization became impossible to maintain. Ships began experiencing random delays and course corrections as relay stations dropped offline unexpectedly, and travel times between core worlds increased by 20% in the first year and kept rising. The Kresh Empire, freed from council oversight by the general chaos, began aggressive expansion into territories left vulnerable by failing communications, and smaller species found themselves unable to coordinate defensive responses. 3 sovereign systems fell to Kresh occupation in a single year, their populations subjugated and their resources claimed. The council could do nothing, because half the member species could not even reach the council station for meetings. Director Foster received reports from Earth's intelligence services detailing the galaxy's deterioration, and she felt no satisfaction in being proven right. "How bad is it?" the Secretary General asked during their weekly briefing. "Worse than we predicted," Foster replied, showing him graphs of galactic trade volumes and communication reliability. "The relay network is approaching critical failure. Several frontier regions are completely isolated, and the Council's authority has collapsed in at least 40 systems." "Are they blaming us?" the Secretary General asked. "Some are," Foster said, "but most are still in denial, convincing themselves this is temporary or coincidental." The Secretary General studied the reports and asked, "Have they tried to contact us?" 17 formal requests for human personnel to return to their positions, Foster said, offering the same compensation and conditions as before. "They still do not understand." "No," Foster agreed. "They think we left because we were angry and that we will come back when we calm down. They cannot conceive that we left because we finally understood our worth. On Earth, humanity had not been idle during their isolation. Freed from the constraints of trying to fit into galactic civilization, human innovation had accelerated at a pace that surprised even the optimists. New drive technologies, advanced medical techniques, improved material science, all developed without having to justify themselves to council oversight committees or compete with elder species' established methodologies. Human colonies in isolated space thrived, building closed-loop economies and supporting each other through the trade networks that had been quietly established during the council years. They did not need the galaxy anymore, if they ever truly had, and that realization was both liberating and melancholy. Ambassador Chen, now serving as Director of External Relations, received the latest delegation request from the Council and read it with detached interest. "They are asking for emergency assistance," she told Foster. "The Zanari want human doctors to help with disease outbreaks. The Fun want human merchants to re-establish trade routes, and several smaller species want human mediators to help resolve conflicts." "What are they offering?" Foster asked. "Apologies," Chen said, "and assurances that humanity will be treated with more respect going forward." "Apologies are not compensation." "No," Chen agreed, "they are not." She drafted a response that was polite and firm, explaining that human personnel were fully occupied with Earth's own development, and that any future cooperation would need to be negotiated through proper channels, with appropriate consideration for human interests. The response did not mention New Harmony or the Council's refusal to investigate, but the memory hung between every word like smoke. In the frontier reaches, colonies that had survived on human supply lines faced a choice between abandoning their settlements or finding ways to survive independently. Most chose survival, and in the process, they developed resilience and self-sufficiency that they had never needed when humans had been available to solve their problems. Some failed and had to be evacuated, but those who succeeded became stronger for it, and they remembered who had helped them before and who had abandoned them when times got hard. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, that civilization was not a monument built once and then maintained effortlessly. It was a garden that required constant tending, and humanity had been doing much of that tending while the elder races congratulated themselves on their philosophical achievements. Now, the garden was becoming overgrown with weeds, and the elder races were discovering that they had forgotten how to use the tools. The second year after humanity's departure marked the point where the Galactic Council's problems transformed from manageable difficulties into existential crises. And even the most optimistic delegates began to understand that something fundamental had broken. The hyperspace relay network, which had been experiencing isolated failures, entered cascading collapse as overworked stations burned out trying to compensate for their failed neighbors, creating a domino effect that spread faster than repair crews could respond. Councillor Venn stood in the emergency session and watched the network status display with growing horror, as red indicators spread across the galactic map like infection. 40% of the network is offline, the Thun technical coordinator reported, its harmonic voice flat with exhaustion. And we project another 20% will fail within the next quarter, unless we can divert resources from other critical infrastructure. Resources? The Kresh delegate demanded. We have already stripped every available ship and crew for network maintenance. There is nothing left to divert. The coordinator's response was quiet. Then we must accept that the network will continue to fail until we can develop new solutions. Nobody mentioned that human engineers had proposed those new solutions years ago, or that the Council had voted down every proposal as too expensive or too radical. But everyone in the chamber was thinking it. Trade between core worlds slowed to a fraction of its previous volume, as shipping companies refused to risk valuable cargo on unreliable routes. And economies that had grown interdependent over millennia suddenly faced isolation they were not equipped to handle. On Zanari Prime, Factories shut down when raw materials from colonial worlds stopped arriving, and unemployment rose to levels not seen in 3,000 years. The Zanari had built their entire civilization on the assumption that galactic trade would always flow smoothly, and now that assumption was proving catastrophically wrong. Food shortages began appearing in the Fun Collective's core systems as agricultural colonies found themselves cut off from distribution networks, and the Collective's careful resource management calculations had not accounted for 30% of their food supply becoming inaccessible. Rationing was implemented for the first time in living memory, and Thun citizens who had spent their lives in comfortable abundance discovered what hunger felt like. The Kresh Empire exploited the chaos with ruthless efficiency, their military forces sweeping into systems where communications had failed and local defenses were operating blind. 17 sovereign worlds fell to Kresh occupation in the second year alone, their populations given the choice between subjugation or extermination, and most chose to survive. The Council could barely coordinate responses because half the member species could not reliably communicate with each other, and those who could found themselves in bitter disputes over how to address the crisis. "We must negotiate with the Kresh," some argued. "We cannot afford open war when our own infrastructure is failing." "Negotiation is surrender," others countered. "If we show weakness now, the Kresh will devour us all." The debates lasted months and accomplished nothing, while the Kresh continued their expansion, and several smaller species withdrew from the Council entirely, choosing isolation over participation in a body that could no longer protect them. On the medical research station, where Dr. Okonkwo had worked, the staff made a breakthrough in treating the plague that had killed millions. But they could not distribute the treatment because the communication network was too unreliable to coordinate production, and the shipping network was too fragmented to guarantee delivery. The treatment saved thousands within the core worlds, where it could be manufactured locally, but millions in frontier regions died because the medicine never reached them. The research team published their findings in every available database and broadcast them on every functioning channel, hoping that local facilities could manufacture the treatment themselves. But many lacked the equipment or expertise. One researcher, a Thun physician who had worked alongside Okonkwo, found himself staring at her old notes and said to his colleague, "She would have found a way to get this treatment to everyone who needed it." His colleague, who had once dismissed human medicine as primitive, replied quietly, "She would have done it 3 months ago, before the network failures made distribution impossible." The disputed territories descended into complete lawlessness as pirate gangs realized that no authority could reach them anymore, and the few merchants still trying to service frontier colonies had to hire mercenary escorts that cost more than the cargo was worth. Colony after colony sent desperate messages asking for help that could not come, and administrators who had spent years complaining about human merchants' irregular schedules now begged for any contact at all. Captain Wong's old routes became known as ghost corridors, shipping lanes where no vessels traveled anymore, and colonies slowly starved or abandoned their settlements. Some tried to reach Earth directly, asking humanity for help, but those messages mostly went unanswered because Earth had closed its borders to everyone except pre-approved diplomatic contact. The galaxy had made it clear that human help was worthless, and now humanity was respecting that assessment. In the council chambers, which were only half full on most days because so many delegates could not reach the station, Councillor Ven proposed what had once been unthinkable. "We must send an official delegation to Earth," he said, his voice carrying the weight of millions dead and billions suffering. "Ask humanity to return." The proposal sparked immediate controversy, with delegates divided between those who saw it as necessary pragmatism and those who viewed it as humiliating surrender. "The humans walked away from their responsibilities," a Fun delegate argued. "Why should we beg them to return?" "Because we are dying," Ven replied simply, showing statistics that made several delegates look away. "Our civilization is collapsing, and we need help." The humans are not the only ones who can maintain relay stations or establish trade routes, the Thun delegate insisted. We simply need time to adapt. Ven pulled up a report that had just arrived from the Zenari Economic Council. This analysis projects complete economic collapse within 3 years if current trends continue. How much time do you think we have? The debate lasted 6 hours before a vote was called, and the resolution passed by the narrowest margin in Council history. Earth would be contacted and offered whatever terms were necessary to secure humanity's return. The delegation that arrived at Earth 3 months later was led by Councillor Ven himself, along with representatives from the Thun Collective and 7 smaller species who had been hit hardest by the crisis. They were met at the orbital station by Ambassador Chen, who had not set foot in space beyond Earth's orbit in 2 years, and the contrast between them was stark. Ven and his colleagues looked exhausted and desperate, their clothes bearing signs of hasty repair, and their faces showing the stress of constant crisis management. Chen looked rested and professional, her uniform crisp and her expression neutral. And Ven realized with painful clarity that humanity had been thriving while the galaxy burned on. Councillor Ven, Chen said formally, Earth welcomes you. Please state your business. Ven had prepared a speech about galactic unity and mutual cooperation, diplomatic language that would allow both sides to save face. But standing here in front of this human who had warned them all and been ignored, he could not bring himself to deliver it. We were wrong, he said instead, about everything. We treated humanity with contempt when you deserved respect. We dismissed your contributions when we should have valued them. And when your people were murdered, we chose politics over justice. Chen's expression did not change. Go on. The galaxy is falling apart without you, Ven continued. We are losing the relay network. Our economies are collapsing. Our medical systems are failing. And we have no one to blame but ourselves. And now you want us to come back and fix it, Chen said, not quite a question. Yes, Ven admitted. We need you. We should have said that 3 years ago. But we were too proud and too foolish. Chen gestured to a conference room. Let us talk in private. Over the next 3 hours, Ven and his delegation laid out the full scope of the crisis, holding nothing back, and the humans listened in silence. When it was done, Chen said, You understand that we cannot simply return to our old positions as if nothing happened. We understand, Ven replied. We are prepared to offer whatever terms you require. This is not about terms, Chen said, her voice harder than Ven had ever heard it. This is about respect. Your species spent 3 centuries taking everything we offered while treating us like foolish children. And when we demanded justice for 300,000 murdered colonists, you told us they did not matter. Ven flinched but did not look away. You are right, and I have no defense for it. The people who died on New Harmony were engineers and doctors and teachers, Chen continued. They were parents and children and dreamers who believed that the galaxy could be a place where different species worked together for the common good. They were wrong, Ven said quietly, and so were we. Chen studied him for a long moment, then said, I will present your request to Earth's government, but I cannot promise anything. Humanity has been building our own future, and many people feel we are better off without the Council. The delegation returned to their ship and waited while Earth considered their request, and Ven spent the time reviewing reports from home that showed the crisis accelerating. The Kresh had taken 3 more systems. A plague outbreak on Thun Prime had killed another 100,000. And 2 relay junctions had failed simultaneously, cutting off an entire sector. On the 5th day, Chen contacted them with Earth's response, and Ven felt his heart sink as he read the formal message. Earth would not rejoin the Galactic Council. Humanity's experience had taught them that the Council was structurally incapable of treating all species with equal dignity. However, Earth was willing to negotiate individual assistance contracts with species who requested help, provided those contracts included fair compensation and recognition of human expertise. It was not the answer Ven had hoped for, but it was better than nothing, and he accepted it, knowing that this was what humanity deserved to demand. The galaxy had finally learned what it cost to take people for granted. 5 years after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, Ambassador Chen stood in the same crystal chamber where she had once begged for justice and found only contempt. But this time, she was not asking for anything. The emergency session had been called because the Council was dying, slowly bleeding member species who could no longer justify participation in a body that had failed to protect them or even maintain basic galactic infrastructure. Councillor Ven, who now chaired the council due to the absence of more senior delegates who could no longer reach the station, looked 20 years older than when Chen had last seen him 5 years ago. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador Chen," he said, and the title felt strange because Earth had not recognized council authority in half a decade. "We asked you here because we need to understand what comes next." Chen took her place at the podium that had once been positioned in the back of the chamber, a junior member, but which now stood empty at the front because so few delegates were present. "What comes next is whatever you make of it," she said simply. "Earth has moved on." "Moved on," Ven repeated the phrase as if testing its weight. "While the galaxy burns, humanity has moved on." "Yes," Chen replied without apology. "You taught us that survival matters more than sentiment, and we learned the lesson well." A Thun delegate who Chen did not recognize stood and said, "Surely Earth has some responsibility to help restore what was broken." Chen felt old anger stir in her chest. What was broken? The relay network that we maintained while you cut maintenance budgets? The trade routes we established while you mocked our recklessness? The medical techniques we pioneered while you called us primitive? "We made mistakes," the Thun delegate admitted. "But does that mean you will abandon the galaxy to collapse?" "We did not abandon the galaxy," Chen said, her voice sharp. "We withdrew from a council that valued us so little that 300,000 human deaths warranted no investigation, no justice, not even acknowledgement." The chamber fell silent, and Ven said quietly, "New harmony haunts us all, Ambassador. There is not a delegate here who does not regret the Council's decision that day." "Regret is not justice," Chen replied, "and it comes too late to matter to the dead." She pulled up a display showing the current state of the galaxy, highlighting failed relay stations and collapsed trade routes and occupied systems. "This is what you built," she said, "a civilization that depended on one species doing the dangerous work while everyone else enjoyed the benefits. And when that species demanded basic respect, you chose pride over pragmatism." "What would you have us do?" Ven asked, and Chen heard genuine desperation in his voice. "Learn," she said. "Learn to maintain your own infrastructure, establish your own trade routes, develop your own solutions instead of waiting for someone else to do it for you." "We have tried," Ven said, "but we do not have humanity's tolerance for risk or your ability to innovate under pressure." "Then learn those things." "Too," Chen replied. "Humanity developed those traits through necessity, not genetics. We learned to take risks because we had no choice, and we learned to innovate because established methods were closed to us." A small delegate from one of the frontier species that had suffered most from the network collapse stood and said, "Ambassador Chen, my people are dying. We understand that Earth has no obligation to help us, but I must ask anyway, is there nothing humanity will do?" Chen looked at the delegate and saw genuine suffering in their expression, and she felt her anger soften slightly because this person had not been part of the council that dismissed New Harmony. "Earth maintains assistance contracts with 17 species," she said, "fair contracts that recognize human expertise and compensate it appropriately. If your government wishes to negotiate such a contract, we will consider it." "At what cost?" the delegate asked. "Fair market rates," Chen replied, plus guarantees of safety for human personnel and recognition of Earth's sovereignty in all dealings. That is all? The delegate seemed surprised. No territorial concessions or political demands? We do not want your territory or your politics, Chen said. We want to be treated as equals, nothing more and nothing less. The delegates sat down, and Chen could see them already composing a message to their home government. Chen spoke again. What about the council itself? Can it be saved? Chen considered the question carefully before answering. The council can survive if it chooses to change, but it must become something different than what it was. Different how? It must abandon the hierarchy that placed elder species above everyone else, Chen said. It must enforce actual consequences when member species commit atrocities, and it must recognize that contributions matter more than age or philosophical tradition. You are describing a completely different organization, Ven observed. Yes, Chen agreed, because the old organization is what created this crisis. A Kresh delegate who had been silent throughout the meeting suddenly spoke, his voice like grinding mountains. And if we refuse these changes? If we maintain the old ways? Chen looked at him directly. Then you will continue to fail, and eventually the council will dissolve entirely. Earth does not need you to collapse, but we will not prevent it either. That is cruel, the Kresh delegate said. Cruelty was letting an entire colony be murdered and calling it a mishap, Chen replied. What we are offering is honesty. The meeting continued for another 3 hours, with various delegates proposing different solutions, and Chen responding with the same basic message. Humanity would help those who asked respectfully and paid fairly, but Earth would not rejoin the council or take responsibility for fixing what the elder species had broken. When it finally ended, Ven asked Chen to stay behind, and they stood together in the empty chamber, looking at the crystal walls that had witnessed so much history. I voted to investigate New Harmony, Ven said quietly. My vote did not matter because I was outnumbered, but I want you to know that some of us understood what you were asking for. I know, Chen said. I saw the voting record. You and 16 others voted for justice, but you were a minority. Does that earn us anything? Ven asked. Those of us who tried? Chen thought about it. It earns you the knowledge that you were on the right side of history, but it does not change what happened, or what humanity learned from it. We failed you, Ven said. We failed ourselves, and we failed every principle the council claimed to uphold. Yes, Chen agreed, you did. Is there any path back from this? Ven asked. Any way to rebuild what was lost? Chen looked around the empty chamber and said, not back, but perhaps forward. The galaxy needs a new council, one built on actual equality and mutual respect. But it cannot be created by the same species who corrupted the old one. What do you mean? I mean that the elder species had their chance to lead, and they failed, Chen said. If there is to be a new galactic organization, it should be built by the species who were dismissed and undervalued, the ones who learned to survive without council protection. Including humanity? Ven asked hopefully. Perhaps, Chen said, but only as equals among equals, never again as junior members, begging for scraps of respect. She left the station that day, knowing she would probably never return, and as Earth receded behind her ship, she thought about all the dreams humanity had carried to the stars. They had dreamed of partnership and found exploitation, dreamed of cooperation and found contempt, dreamed of justice and found indifference, but they had also found themselves. Discovered that they were stronger and more capable than the elder species had ever acknowledged, and that knowledge was worth more than any council membership. On Earth, Director Foster read Chen's report and smiled grimly. So the council wants us back? Some of them do, Chen replied via holoconference. Others still believe they can manage without us, but the balance is shifting. Let them shift, Foster said. We have our own future to build. And they did. In the 5 years since leaving the Council, humanity had established colonies in regions the elder species considered too dangerous, had developed technologies the Council would have regulated into uselessness, and had built alliances with other dismissed species based on mutual benefit rather than hierarchical authority. Earth's economy had never been stronger. Human culture was experiencing a renaissance free from alien oversight, and the human spirit that had always sought the stars was finally unbound. Some species did negotiate assistance contracts, paying fair rates for human expertise and treating human personnel with the respect they deserved. These contracts were mutually beneficial and often grew into genuine partnerships, the kind of relationships humanity had always wanted from the Council. Other species refused, either from pride or poverty, and watched their civilizations continue to decay. The Kresh Empire overextended itself, conquering territory it could not govern, and eventually fractured into civil war as subject populations rebelled. The Zanari withdrew into isolationism, trying to maintain their philosophical traditions while their infrastructure crumbled. The Thun Collective survived through rigid rationing and careful resource management, but their population declined year after year as young Thun emigrated to human space seeking opportunity. 10 years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council held its final session, attended by only 7 species who voted unanimously to dissolve the organization that had once claimed to represent galactic civilization. Councillor Ven, attending via hologram because the relay network could no longer guarantee safe passage, delivered the closing statement. "We told ourselves that we were the guardians of galactic civilization," he said, "but we were only its undertakers, presiding over the slow death of an idea. Us, when the truth was precisely the opposite. They offered us their best, and we gave them our worst, and now we face the consequences of that choice. Let history record that the Galactic Council died not from external conquest or natural disaster, but from our own pride and short-sightedness. And let history also record that when given the chance to acknowledge our mistakes, we waited until it was far too late to matter." The transmission ended, and the council chamber went dark for the final time, and across the galaxy, species who had relied on council authority for millennia found themselves alone. Some thrived, learning the self-reliance that humanity had always practiced. Some failed, unable to adapt to a universe that demanded competence over heritage. And humanity watched from a distance, neither gloating nor grieving, simply continuing to build the future they had been denied the right to share. Ambassador Chen, now retired and teaching history at New Beijing University, ended her lectures on the council era with the same observation every semester. The galaxy did not realize its mistake when humanity walked away, she told her students. They realized it slowly, painfully, one failure at a time, until the weight of their mistakes finally crushed what they had built. And the lesson for all of us is this: never take for granted those who do the work that others will not, because the day they stop doing it is the day you discover how much you truly needed them. The students nodded, writing notes, but Chen wondered if they truly understood. Understanding came from experience, and she hoped they would never have to experience what her generation had endured. The galaxy had learned its lesson, but the cost of that education had been measured in dead colonies and collapsed civilizations. And somewhere in the crystal ruins of the council station, abandoned and dark, the walls still held the memory of 300,000 human voices crying out for justice. Justice that came too late, if it came at all.